Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on something you interact with constantly, maybe without even thinking about it, how software actually gets built.
Right, from your coffee app to, the huge operating system on your computer.
Exactly. There's this whole world of planning and creating going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Our mission today is really to cut through that complexity. We want to give you a clear understanding of the stages and also the different ways people approach building software.
Yeah, and we've looked at some fascinating sources that really lay this all out.
They do. It's a bit of a shortcut to being well-informed, and hopefully you'll have a few aha moments.
Hmm.
So, okay, let's unpack this. What actually goes into creating these digital tools we rely on every single day?
It is fascinating, isn't it? We just click download or update and kind of take for granted the huge amount of thought, the structured effort, all the problem solving that happens.
Hmm.
And understanding this stuff isn't just for, software engineers. It's really for anyone who uses technology. So basically everyone.
That's a great point.
The material we explored gives a really structured look at the whole life cycle from that first idea to the finished thing. And as we'll see, the different methods teams use can lead to really different results: speed, cost, how well it actually meets your needs.
So to really get into it, we need to start with the basics. What even is software at its core?
Right. The fundamental question?
We all use it constantly. Think about the apps on your phone, your browser, games, work tools, or even the code running your smart home, maybe.
Invisible stuff. Yeah.
All of it is software, basically, the programs running on a computer. And getting from that initial idea to the final product, it follows distinct stages: analysis, design, implementation, evaluation, and maintenance.
And it's often shown as a circle, right? Because it's continuous.
Exactly, it's cyclical. Let's start with that first step.
Okay, so that cycle kicks off meticulously with analysis. This is super crucial. It's where a systems analyst, almost like a detective, really digs in to gather all the vital information.
What kind of information are they looking for?
They're trying to answer key questions like, what does the current system do, if there is one? And maybe more importantly, what does the new system need to do? What problems does it solve?
How do they find that out?
Well, they might interview future users, use questionnaires for bigger groups, maybe observe the existing system in action, or just go through old documents.
Okay.
And the result of all this is a really key document. It might be called a system specification or user requirements,
And why is that so important?
because it defines exactly what the system will do. Crucially, not how. It's like the contract, the foundation. It guides the design later, and it's what you check against during evaluation.
Got it. So analysis defines the what, then comes design.
Exactly. Design is where the blueprint starts forming. This includes describing the data, its type, format, how it's validated.
Like making sure an age is a number or an email looks like an email.
Precisely. Getting those rules right early on saves so much trouble later. It also covers database design, how the screens will look, the processing logic, and even planning how testing will happen.
And after the blueprint, you actually build it.
That's implementation. This is the coding phase, the actual software testing, writing documentation for users and technical folks, and installing the software.
Okay, so you've analyzed, designed, coded, but here's where it gets really interesting for me. How do you know if it even works properly?
Testing. Absolutely essential and often doesn't get enough glory.
Our sources mentioned a couple of main strategies here. First, black box testing.
Right. Imagine the software is just a black box you can't see inside. This testing ignores the code completely.
So what does it focus on?
It focuses purely on the specification, what it's supposed to do. You create test data for inputs, check the outputs, see if the functions work as expected, like checking if a car accelerates and brakes correctly without looking at the engine.
Okay, testing from the outside. And the other one, white box testing.
Complete opposite. White box testing depends on knowing the internal code logic. You design tests specifically to make sure every single possible path through the code, every decision, every line, gets tested at least once. It's like putting the car on a diagnostic machine, checking every wire.
Okay. So why might you need both of these? They sound quite different.
Well, think about it. White box checks if the engine itself is built correctly, all parts working. Black box checks if the car actually drives well on the road for the user. Does it do what you expect when you press the pedals? You really need both perspectives, don't you?
Yeah, that makes sense. You wouldn't want a car that only passed one of those tests. One checks the internals, the other checks the actual user experience.
Exactly. You need both for robust software.
And beyond those core methods, there are different phases of testing, right? Like alpha testing.
Yes. Alpha testing is done by the developer's own team, their in-house people, but also, and this is key, by the actual user or client.
Why involve the user so early?
It's great for finding errors or things missed in the original requirements. The user might see it and say, hang on, this isn't quite what I needed.
Ah, so it's an early reality check. Why might that happen, though? Why would it not be what they wanted?
Well, maybe the requirements weren't perfectly clear initially, or maybe seeing a working version changes the user's own understanding of what they need. It happens.
Okay. And then there's beta testing.
Right. You see this a lot with commercial software, say that big office suites or new operating system versions before they officially launch.
Yeah, public betas.
Exactly. The software is given to potential users, a wider group, who use it in their own real environments and report any bugs or issues they find.
And our sources had this interesting line. Real users may try and do things the developer didn't anticipate. How is that helpful? Sounds chaotic.
Oh, it's incredibly helpful. It's where the rubber meets the road. Beta testers might use features in weird sequences, combine things developers never thought of, push the system really hard.
Finding edge cases?
Finding edge cases, performance issues under real stress, weird bugs that only show up with specific data or workflows. A small dev team just can't possibly imagine every single thing a real user might do. It's invaluable feedback.
Makes sense. So after all that testing,
Mm-hmm.
what's next?
Then comes evaluation, sometimes called acceptance testing. This is really the final check. Does it actually work? The user tests every aspect against that original specification document.
Moment of truth.
Pretty much. But even then, it's not over. Software needs ongoing maintenance. It lives on.
Right, software isn't static. What kinds of maintenance are there?
Our sources highlight three main types. First, corrective maintenance. No matter how good the testing, bugs will pop up after launch. Real-world use always finds something, so this is just fixing those bugs.
Like a car recall, but for software.
Sort of, yeah. Essential, but you want to minimize it with good upfront work because fixes cost time and money. Then there's adaptive maintenance.
Adapting to what?
To change. User needs evolve. Maybe new laws come in, the business expands. The software needs to adapt to keep up. It's about keeping it relevant.
Like upgrading a building instead of tearing it down.
Good analogy. And finally, perfective maintenance. This is about making the software better, even if it's working fine. Making it faster, easier to use, adding cool new features that weren't in the original plan.
Improving it proactively.
Exactly. And once you make those changes...
Ah, the cycle begins again. Analysis, design, implementation.
You got it. It reinforces that cyclical nature. Software development is rarely just a one-time thing. It's an ongoing evolution.
That's a really clear breakdown of the whole life cycle. Analysis, design, implementation, evaluation, maintenance, and back again. But you mentioned earlier that the way teams go through this cycle can be very different.
Yes, the methodology.
Right. While the stages are generally there, the philosophy, the rhythm, how you navigate them, that varies a lot. So let's dig into these different approaches, these methodologies. Maybe start with a classic one.
Okay, the classic, probably most traditional one is the waterfall model.
Like the actual waterfall. Goes one way.
Precisely. Each stage, analysis, design, implementation, etc., has to be fully completed and documented before the next one can even start. It flows strictly downwards, one step after the other.
So what's the catch?
The big one is that the customer doesn't see anything working until the very end. And if you need to change something from an earlier stage, well, like the source says, climbing back up the waterfall isn't that simple. Often means starting over or big reworks.
Sounds risky. Are there upsides?
There are. It's simple to understand and manage because each stage has clear outputs and documentation. It can work well for smaller projects where the requirements are super clear and definitely won't change. Rock solid requirements.
Okay, so simplicity and structure. But the downsides sound significant, especially today.
They can be. Very little user involvement after the initial sign-off, no working software until late. Changes are really difficult and expensive once a stage is done.
So when would you actually use waterfall?
When requirements are crystal clear, fixed, no ambiguity. When the technology is well understood, nothing experimental. And usually for shorter, simpler projects.
That sounds very rigid, almost like that factory assembly line you mentioned before. Everything planned up front, no deviations.
Exactly.
But what if things do change? Market shifts, new competitor features, or what if the requirements aren't perfectly clear at the start, or the project is just massive, taking years? Waterfall sounds like it would struggle.
You've hit the nail on the head. That rigidity is its weakness in a dynamic world. And that's why other models emerged, like the spiral model.
Spiral, how does that work?
It takes those core steps,
Yeah.
analysis, design, implementation, evaluation, but it repeats them. It goes through these phases iteratively, in loops, like spiraling
Okay,
outwards.
so multiple cycles.
Yes, each loop around the spiral produces a new, more refined prototype of the software. You keep looping until the software meets all the requirements. It's built piece by piece with feedback each time.
Ah, so you get feedback earlier.
Much earlier. That's a huge advantage. You still have well-defined steps, so it's manageable. But you get working software, or at least a prototype, early on. Problems get started sooner.
And the user sees these prototypes.
Yes, they give feedback on each one. So changes can be made early. When they're cheaper and easier, you can even add new features during the process. The end result is much more likely to be what the user actually needs.
That sounds much better for complex situations. Are there downsides?
It takes longer overall because you're constantly prototyping, getting feedback, refining. All those cycles add up, so it's generally more costly. And probably overkill for small, simple projects.
So when is spiral the right choice?
It really shines for medium to high-risk projects, when users aren't totally sure what they need or the requirements are complex and might change. Also great for really large projects that could take years, where technology and needs will definitely evolve.
Okay, so we have the rigid waterfall, the iterative spiral, much more adaptable. But you mentioned speed earlier. What about models focused purely on rapid development and change?
Right, and that brings us squarely to the agile model.
Agile is everywhere now, isn't it?
It really is. With Agile, software is developed in these rapid incremental cycles. Each cycle, often called a sprint, builds on the previous functionality, and each increment is thoroughly tested before release.
So lots of small releases.
Exactly. It's great for speed and adapting quickly, good for small, time-critical projects, and you don't need massive upfront planning to get going.
What are the big wins with Agile?
Rapid continuous delivery of working software users get value quickly, high customer satisfaction because they're involved constantly. There's this tight interaction between customers, developers, testers, almost one team.
Working software delivered in weeks, not months.
Often, yes, which means fast feedback, quick course corrections, it adapts easily to change. Even late changes aren't necessarily a disaster.
Sounds great, but are there drawbacks?
There can be. There's generally less emphasis on formal, heavy documentation, which might not suit every context. It can also struggle if the customer isn't really engaged or clear on the end goal because it relies so much on that continuous feedback.
And the team needs to be experienced.
Generally, yes. It requires experienced people who can make decisions quickly without a rigid, predefined plan for everything. So Agile is best when you need to implement changes frequently and cheaply, or for businesses where needs are constantly evolving.
And Agile isn't just one thing, right? Our sources mentioned extreme programming, XP.
Yes, XP is a specific type of Agile. It really takes those ideas to the, well, extreme. Very short cycles, like 1 or 2 weeks. Practices like pair programming, 2 devs, 1 computer, and constant testing. It's all about maximizing productivity and responsiveness. Very disciplined.
Interesting. And then there was rapid application development, RAD. How does that fit in?
RAD is another approach focused on speed. It often uses workshops and focus groups instead of formal requirement documents. It relies heavily on prototyping. Build something fast, get user feedback, iterate.
Less formal, more interactive.
Definitely. And a key thing in RAD is strict time limits, time boxing for each part. The goal is good enough to move forward quickly. Plus, it heavily emphasizes reusing existing software components whenever possible to speed things up. Don't reinvent the wheel.
So many different ways to approach this. When you think about really big, long projects, you mentioned things can go wrong, people leave, requirements change, tech moves on, costs balloon.
Exactly. All those very real risks.
How do these different methodologies actually help manage those risks?
Well, it's a key differentiator. Think about waterfall on a 3-year project. If requirements change significantly in year 2, you might be in serious trouble. Huge costs, maybe the project even gets canceled.
Because you can't easily go back up the waterfall.
Precisely. But look at Spiral or Agile. Because they're iterative, they build in feedback loops, they expect change to some degree, they deliver working software incrementally, so if requirements shift or tech changes, they can adapt much more easily within the next cycle or sprint.
So they handle uncertainty better.
Much better. They significantly reduce the risk of the project becoming irrelevant or unmanageable before it's even finished. It's a shift from trying to perfectly predict the future to navigating it adaptively, learning as you go.
Wow. Okay, so just to recap, you've walked us through the entire software development lifecycle analysis, design, implementation, evaluation, maintenance, and we've explored these really distinct ways of managing that cycle.
Yeah.
Waterfall, spiral, agile, XP, RAD.
Quite a journey through the world of software creation.
It really is.
Hmm.
And it's so clear that there's no single best way. Each method has its strengths, its weaknesses, and situations where it just makes more sense.
Depends entirely on the project, the team, the client, the risks involved.
So the next time you download that app update, or you're wondering why a new feature took ages, or maybe why some software feels a bit clunky, you'll have a much better feel for the complex journey it took to get to your screen.
Absolutely. And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Considering how incredibly fast technology changes and how our own needs as users are constantly evolving, what do these different ways of building software mean for the future? How quickly can we realistically expect truly groundbreaking, innovative stuff to reach us? Will these methods get even faster, more adaptive, or will we see entirely new approaches emerge?
That's a great question. Something to definitely think about the next time you interact with any piece of software. Really observing it through this new lens we've discussed today.